I want to welcome everyone here. I am Republican leader Senator Rob Ortt. I'm joined by my colleagues in the Senate Republican Conference. We're going to hear from several of them. You're going to hear from Senator Rolison, Senator Wyke, as well as Senator Canzonieri Fitzpatrick. And we're here today to talk about discovery, the ugly cousin or stepsister of bail reform, right? We always talk about bail reform, but we talk a lot less about discovery. We're also very honored to be joined by a friend and a district attorney who believes, like this conference does, that criminals should be held to account for their actions. That people who rob, rape, murder, steal, assault, that there should be repercussions and penalties, and that, I know this might sound crazy, but that some of those people belong in jail. And she has done a great job representing and prosecuting for the 5th largest DA's office in the state. Nassau County, we're joined by Nassau County DA Annie Donnelly, who I was just talking to her about. I remember hearing about her back when a lot of the press here in Albany sort of had anointed Todd Kaminsky as the next DA in Nassau County. And you might be wondering who that is. And it's because he never got there. Annie Donnelly did, and we're very grateful she did. And but she's done a great job, and she has joined us to talk about discovery reform. And again, this is something that I think a lot of people, meaning New Yorkers, may not even still really understand what happened. But it was done at the same time as bail back in 2019. And now 5 years, or I guess almost 6 years into it, the governor and even some Democrats have said we need to reform, we need to change discovery. It's resulting in way too many felony cases being outright dismissed, charges dropped, because DA's offices cannot meet the arbitrary and ridiculous timeframes that discovery sets out. But the ironic thing is this conference, many of the members who are still behind me today, back in 2019, including Senator Lanza, our deputy, who debated this bill on the floor, we said all the things that Democrats are saying today, we said it 6 years ago. We said it before discovery was the law. We said this would happen. And it took the governor and it took the Democrats, at least some, 6 years to even come to that same conclusion. And it took how many thousands of cases, tens of thousands around the state, how many felons who would otherwise be in jail, how many dangerous people who would otherwise be held to account are roaming out there today simply because a prosecutor's office could not meet the time frames. And again, you're talking about, in some of these cases in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, in Nassau, in Suffolk, you're talking about thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of cases a year that they have to work through. And they do the best job they can, but this law made her job more difficult. She took an oath to protect the people in Nassau County, and discovery made that job more difficult. It made it more difficult for her to protect the people that she swore an oath. It made it more difficult for her to uphold the Constitution that she swore to uphold. And there's many more DAs just like her. Now, the governor has proposed a change to bail. I will tell you, this conference, the only reason she's proposed it is because this conference, the constant drumbeat that discovery is not working, that discovery is resulting in dangerous people being let back out. That's why she's proposing it, because she feels that it's a political problem for her as she moves into an election year. And it is a political problem for her. But it's a political problem of her own doing. It's a political problem that the Democrats have created here in Albany and in New York. We're going to continue this drumbeat. I don't think this goes far enough, but you know what? I'm a practical guy, and the DAs have signed off on it, saying that this is a step in the right direction. As my colleagues across the aisle always say, it's the first step. Everything they do is the first step. Well, this is the first step back towards sanity. This is the first step back towards making things a little more safer for New Yorkers. And it's something this conference has called for before it was the law. Before it was the law, New Yorkers should know that. We're moving back to the Republican position, the position of common sense, of safety, of understanding that there needs to be an accountability, of protecting New Yorkers. We moved away from that. The Democrats moved us away from that back in 2019, and they're still fighting. In the Senate One House, discovery was left out. The governor's proposal was left out because they still, even with the numbers, they still can't wrap their heads around that protecting people and victims, protecting victims and making sure there's justice for victims. That's the priority, not justice for perpetrators. That is not the priority of this conference, nor should it be of any elected official in the state of New York. It's certainly not Amy Donnelly's priority. Her priority is the victims, people that have been assaulted, people that have been raped, robbed, people that are victims of crime. That's her mandate. That's what she goes to work every day for. That's what this conference, that's where we keep our focus on. Unfortunately, that has not been the focus of my colleagues across the aisle, and that's how we got here. That's why we're here today. But the governor, she put this in her budget. We think it's a step in the right direction. The DAs think it's a step in the right direction. My colleagues in the Democratic Conference, I guess they don't think so. That's why it wasn't in their one house. Everything else was in their one house, to be clear. Everything else, including $17 billion more year-over-year spending. So it's not like they forgot about it. They left it out intentionally because they don't believe that making these changes to protect New Yorkers is a priority. And New Yorkers should remember that. And the governor needs to make sure, and I'm here to call on her, there should not be a budget that doesn't include her proposal on discovery. Nothing else. I don't want to water down, it's kind of already, it's like vanilla ice cream. I don't want to water down vanilla ice cream. So this is a step in the right direction. Anything less is not good enough for New Yorkers. I would have liked to have seen her go a little further, but you know what? Anything less than this, she should not sign a budget. If the budget has to be late to protect New Yorkers, so be it. So be it. And you're going to hear all the reasons why from the DA and from Patricia Canzoneri Fitzpatrick, who's a lawyer, and some of my other colleagues, Rob Rolison, who is a police officer, and Senator White, who is the mother and the wife of police officers. You're going to hear about why this law has made it more dangerous and has made it harder for the people that we ask to protect us. And so with that, I want to call up my colleague, a former police officer, and someone who was a mayor. And I can tell you as a former mayor, when you're the mayor, I would argue the big, maybe property taxes, but besides property taxes, the biggest issue you get graded on is, do people feel safe in your city? Do people feel safe? That's why Senator Myrie, who was an architect, biggest supporter of discovery and bail and less is more and clean slate. But you know what? He's running for mayor of New York, so we got to make some changes to discovery, because you want to know why? Because mayors get judged by safety way more than we do. It's just the way it goes. Mayors get judged by that. And this next speaker, Senator Rolison, he was a mayor, so he knows how to protect people. He was a police officer, so he really knows how to protect people. And he knows why this change is necessary and why the current law is very insufficient and very dangerous. And it gives me a lot of pleasure to call up my great colleague, Senator Rob Rolison.
Thank you, Leader. I was thrilled when I was asked to be part of this press conference this morning with our great DA from Nassau County. You know, the leader said that discovery has become a political problem for the governor. Well, you know what? It's a problem for victims and survivors. And as the leader said, I was a police officer and was for 26 years, starting in 1982 to 2008. And there weren't even terms like survivor in 1982. They were victims. And the work that we did then changed over the years to be more what they called the victim-centered approach. And in 1994, I had the great fortune of becoming a detective, in which I held that position for 14 years, and then I retired in 2008. And there is often said, and I say this a lot, there isn't a more lonely place in this world than being a victim of crime and being a survivor of a criminal act. unless you have experienced that, and I have not, you can't really understand it. And those victims and those survivors carry that burden essentially forever. And it is incumbent upon the government, district attorneys like the one standing right next to me, who prosecute individuals and hold them accountable for those victims, for those survivors. And we've learned so much over the years about what it means to be a victim and a survivor. Trauma is a word that is used constantly. When I was a new cop, trauma meant a car accident. Now it means so many other things, and that trauma never goes away. And I remember that there were times when I would be with someone who called for help with those folks for months, sometimes 2 years, depending on the type of case it was. And there were many times that people would be very reluctant, especially victims of sexual assault and domestic violence, to go forward with a complaint, to make that first step, to hold that person accountable. And it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes compassion, both on the police officer and the victim services that are now so prevalent throughout this state. In 1982, not so much. So here we have the reforms of 2019 have set that back, no doubt. And the other side doesn't really want to talk about it. Yeah, they've tweaked bail reform a couple of times, but it's still not where it needs to be. And now you have the issues with discovery where cases are being dismissed, as the leader said. You had a case just recently in New York City where an individual who allegedly assaulted his ex-girlfriend and then made her disrobe in front of her friends, that case was dismissed on a nonsensical technicality. What do you say to her? What do you say to her? Do you think she'll ever come forward again? Because she's probably, unfortunately, could be a victim of an abuser, maybe even this guy, because she can't get an order of protection. So, you know, the governor's changes, they make some sense. They don't go far enough because the statistics bear out. You know, convictions are down, especially in the area of domestic violence and sexual assault. So we're saying to the governor, and especially to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, no budget without changes. How can you claim to be on the side of the people you represent, especially the most vulnerable, when you don't even really want to talk about it? It's not even included in the One House. We'll see what happens. 56 district attorneys recently sent a letter to the governor and the leaders of both houses saying, we want these changes. 56, which I think are all the DAs outside of New York City, and I know that they want those changes too. So if we're going to get back to public safety, which is the first priority of government, for us, right now, in this moment, it starts here. Make a change so individuals who want to report crimes know that those investigations will take place and individuals will be held accountable and not walking free on some nonsensical technicality to discovery, especially when it relates to things that don't even relate to the case. That's the thing that is really hurting these initiatives that they put forward. Again, the New York way, let's do it and figure it out later, but unfortunately it's taken, 5 years or more to figure it out, and it's still not really figured out. So you're going to hear from my colleagues and the district attorney who was fighting this fight every single day in Nassau County, and they're lucky to have you, Madam DA. They're lucky to have you. So I'm going to turn this over now to my colleague and friend who sits next to me in the New York State Senate, and as the leader said, is the wife of a retired police officer and the mother of a current state trooper, Alexis White.
Thank you, Senator Rollison. And I'm very proud to be here today with our great district attorney from Nassau County. She does us proud. She works hard. She does an outstanding job. And yet, for those of us who are non-lawyers and maybe not part of law enforcement, even though we've been discussing this for about 6 years, so many people still say, discovery. What are you talking about? What is it? And with that, I want to explain. So we've heard this term over and over since the passage of bail reform. Since 2019, Democrats in the legislature have been passing not just soft on crime policies, but very, very pro-criminal legislation that completely disregards crime victims. And here we are again today suffering those consequences. Despite what has been put in the governor's budget, we don't see it in the One House. Discovery reform went into effect in January of 2020. These reforms require prosecutors to disclose evidence to the defense earlier in the case proceedings. The reforms were aimed to ensure greater openness and establish specific timeframes for evidence sharing between prosecution and defense. Let me be clear, so-called discovery reform, first, poorly drafted to benefit criminals at the expense of victims. It's led to chaos in our criminal justice system and has caused serious criminals to get away with their crimes on technicalities. It's also made it harder for prosecutors to protect the identities of victims and witnesses of crime, making it harder to prosecute those cases. Fixing discovery and protecting victims shouldn't be a political issue, but the Democrats in the legislature continue to make it part of their pro-criminal agenda. I have two bills that address some of the very serious issues with our state law. S 4617, which allows names and contact information to be withheld where a court finds that a witness victim is subject to potential witness intimidation, violence, or threats. I also have S 4634, which creates a crime of being unlawful dissemination of publication of discovery material. Let's bring these also to the floor, not just the very, as was said, very vanilla ice cream policy that the governor put in her budget, but let's also bring other common sense discovery laws to the floor. Let's get these pieces of legislation passed. Let's help victims. It's time to stop promoting criminal behavior and start protecting the victims of crime. And with that, it brings me great pleasure, and it's such a privilege to be able to serve with Senator Patricia Canzoneri Fitzpatrick, who serves in her district so well and is a great asset to Nassau County. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Ort, for bringing this very important issue to the press. The 2019 so-called criminal justice reforms drastically changed our discovery rules, as well as bail reform, and we've talked an awful lot about bail reform, but the discovery changes really overhauled a complex system by only incorporating the changes from one side of the equation. The input from DAs, prosecutors, law enforcement, and the practical effect of the discovery changes was never given due attention. And what's the result? The result is a system that rewards gamesmanship by defense counsel who wait until the last possible moment to argue that some small piece of evidence, without regard to whether or not it's relevant to the case, was not turned over. They know the game, and they have an ethical rule to zealously defend their client. But you have put an incredible burden on all of the DAs who have an oath to protect us. The DAs and prosecutors are burdened with voluminous discovery demands without regard to whether or not it's relevant. Bail reform created a revolving justice door. Created a revolving door in our criminal justice system, but arguably even more detrimental to our criminal justice system in getting convictions is the discovery changes that have been implemented. More dismissals and less cases going to trial have resulted in more dangerous criminals slipping through the cracks. As is typical of my colleagues across the aisle, they try to spend their way out of their problem, and to the tune of $80 million a year. But we don't need more money thrown at this problem. We need real change. And unfortunately, the legislature does not seem receptive to the changes that were needed, since their one-house budgets do not include anything about discovery reform. Our duty as elected officials is to provide public safety, full stop. Nothing else is more important. That's what we're supposed to do. And we must get these discovery changes into our budget. We need to reverse the trend of dangerous criminals walking free on technicalities because a clock ran out. It is my great honor to recognize someone who has been a leader in this fight to restore some sanity to our criminal justice system. District Attorney Ann Donnelly lives and breathes this every day. So it is my distinct honor that she has joined us here in Albany to share her personal experiences with what has gone on with these discovery changes. District Attorney, Madam Donnelly, thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you to Leader Ort for having me here today. There's really one thing I want to say. I live this every day. My ADAs live this every day. And the discovery changes and bail changes made in 2019 have made us less safe. That's the bottom line. Less safe. And that's not what I promised the people of Nassau County and not what we promised the people of New York State. We want them to be more safe, not less safe. To have people walking out on a technicality because someone didn't turn over the last line of a memo book that said, and then I signed off, good night, is a disgrace. It's a disgrace that a case, an important case, would be dismissed because of something like that. We have hundreds of cases, thousands of cases that we have to deal with every year. Nassau County is the 5th biggest county in the state. We can't keep up with it. We can't keep up with the changes and with the timelines, this arbitrary timeline of get it done by day 15 is impossible. So here's what I'm asking. I'm asking the governor, and I'm asking everyone to at least put back the small change the governor suggested. It's a good first step. It doesn't go far enough, but it's a good first step. Because somewhere in this argument, somewhere in this back and forth from one side of the aisle to the other, we forgot about the victims. And that's the people we can never, ever forget about. I have ADAs sit with victims. I sit with victims. They're crying, telling you the story about what happened to them. And then 30 days later, we have to tell them the case was dismissed because we didn't turn over the I signed off duty, good night. There's something wrong with a system that would do that to a victim. My job is to protect the victims. My job is to get the criminals off the street and behind bars in some cases where they belong. And I need your help to do that, to get this done. So thank you for having me up here today. Thank you for listening. And I really hope we can make at least some changes and get us back on the track of helping the victims, the victim justice system, right? That's what it really should be called.
Madam DA, thank you very much. Well, Madam DA, thank you very much. Well said. And I want to just add, you know, we pass laws here, and obviously people form against them. But at the end of the day, she and her other DAs, they have to still do their job, right? They don't get to just roll it up and say, well, this law, you know, is terrible. And they still have to do it in spite of the additional hurdles, in spite of the additional challenges that we have put in front of them. And they're the ones, by the way, you heard it from her, they're the ones who have to tell victims, we're sorry, but this person's going free today because we didn't meet a timeline that makes no sense. We're sorry, some arbitrary thing that you will think is the dumbest thing in the world, that's why your abuser, your ex-boyfriend, your assaulter, that's why they're gonna go free. They're the ones. It isn't Senator so-and-so or Assemblyman so-and-so or the governor who has to deliver that message. It's the DAs. And I don't know how they do that. I don't know that I'd be able to do it. but they have to do it every single day and still try to pursue justice where they can. So as the DA said, and as my great colleagues have said, if the governor is serious, if this isn't just about lip service, then this will be part of the budget. Her proposal, that first step, will be part of the budget proposal. And if my Democrat colleagues don't want it in there, then maybe we don't have a budget on time until it is.